Welcome, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending upon where you are. And thank you for joining us for the latest iteration in our Lessons Learned series. Today, I will be talking about a special kind of cost benefit analysis called social rates of return, where we are looking at, in the grand scheme of things, were these innovations cost effective? So, from a higher level perspective, USAID and its partners in CETA, the Netherlands, and for the Secure and Water for Food Grand Challenge, the South African Department of Science and Technology, really wanted to not just fund innovation, but be cost efficient and cost effective in doing so. And so, one of the things that we wanted to do was not just look at how much impact the things that we were funding were having, but how much impact per dollar were they having? How much impact were they having as far as a rate of return for the customers and end users at the end, as far as income generation or productivity increases, etc. And so we took a gargantuan effort to collect data on those things. And so I'm joined here today by our former monitoring evaluation advisor, Saad, as well as two SWFF graduates from Skyfox, Oliver, and from Ignitia, Lisa. And so they're going to share their perspectives on this. From a high level perspective, USAID and its partners really believe that based on the evidence we have from Secure and Water for Food and from the final evaluation of the program, that this social rate of return metric can be quite valuable. And what it's showed us is that there is, in fact, a significant amount of evidence that can be both collected and generated with not a lot of financial expenditure. And so, with that, I will turn it over to Saad to lead us through a quick presentation on what a cost benefit analysis is and what a social rate of return is and how we conducted those through the SWIFT program. So, Saad, over to you.
So the cost benefit analysis by itself refers to the cost and benefits of a society investing in a particular service. The social benefit is inclusive of the increased productivity as a result of this investment. So a social rate of return analysis is essentially a cost benefit analysis that attempts to include non-economic benefits such as education, healthcare, or technology. In regards to SWIFT, the social rate of returns, they refer to the gains from investments in these agricultural technologies that were being provided for farmers. Next slide. So the social rate of return that we performed was based on a USAID cost-benefit analysis called the Nigeria Markets 2 survey. This was modified to create our social rate of return. So this market survey was, I believe, based on 8 or 10 commodities, and it was just based on USAID services given to farmers in Nigeria. So what I did was instead of the commodities, the social rate of returns were organized by countries, and we did them on 18 innovators, I believe, in 10 countries. So rather than crop, they were organized by country, and the defining term of the social rate of return was the MIRR, or the modified internal rate of return, which is another way of just saying a return on an investment. Next slide. For our social rate of returns, we took into account about 4 major things that affected our measurement of the social benefit. The first was the number of farmers and how many of them managed to keep using the technology. Their increase in crop yield as a result of the technology, and their changes in input use and costs, and any changes they had in their income as a direct result of the technology. Next slide. We performed two methods for data collection in order to perform the social rate of returns. The first was provided by the innovator, in which I sent a template for the information that was needed for our social rate of return, and through conversation and through numerous calls, we clarified the information. And the other was there were field evaluations done, and in their surveys, there were tailored questions that were particularly related to the social rate of return. Next slide. So the primary way that was provided, where data was provided for was by innovators, where a call was scheduled with an innovator. A draft, like I said, a template was sent to the innovator, it was filled out, and then the follow-up questions were asked, and multiple emails were exchanged to clarify this information, and the final call was set for the final data. Next slide. So for the data provided by the field evaluators, as I said, in the surveys, we put in specific questions related to the purpose of the social rate of return. As part of the survey, there was also a part explaining the social rate of return to the evaluators, so they can more accurately find the information. And then their data was cleaned, and the information was put into the template. And throughout a few weeks, there was constant back and forth between the field evaluator and myself to correct any discrepancies. Next slide. Yeah, so the importance of the social rate of returns were that in a technical manner, they're a financial document that calculates the net gain of a farmer due to the changes in their crop production, and they serve as a metric to evaluate the funding of non-economic benefits. Next slide. So here's a table that gave with a brief overview of specific innovators, their country, their rate of return on investment, or their MIRR, the reasoning behind their respective MIRRs, and the total number of households that they reached. Just to give a quick summary, is to show that the MIRRs are consistently high. The standard was 10 to 20% for the USA Nigeria market survey, and as you can see, they're all significantly higher than that. And the reasonings are usually have to do with the reduction of certain input costs, high crop yield increases, high uptake by farmers or adoption rate, and significant income increases. So that's what substantiated or justified these high return on investments. Next slide. These are continue to see a more range of investments, so you can see where the low MIRRs are. For instance, in World Hope and Adaptive Symbiotic Technologies, they were primarily due to a very low adoption rate or a very negligible change in income. Or a negligible impact on input use. So they did vary, but overall, I believe the average rate was a 41% based on 18 innovators, so it was significantly higher than expected. Next slide. Yeah. And to finish it off, it was to show the last three of the innovators. Where you can see the reasoning, all with substantial MIRRs, with the increase in crop yields and incomes, as well as the reductions in inputs being the primary reason for those. Next slide. Yeah, so the range of the MIRRs saw was between -5%, where it was a slightly negative impact, to 93% for Ignitia, which is with an average of 38%. which was significantly higher than the standard. 11 out of the 15 innovators had MIRRs greater than 30%, while 2 had acceptable ranges, and only 2 had substandard ones. And that was primarily to a very low adoption rate. So these social rate of returns depended on the depth of impact, input, time, and income changes, and the breadth as well, the adoption number and the uptake number. Next slide. And this is just a graph of the innovators against their SOR, social rate of returns. And as for a chart showing the breadth of the impact, this is the MIR percentage on the left, and on the x-axis the innovator along with the number of adoptions. So the number of people who adopted the technology. So this is just to show that you can see a higher MIR with the people with the higher numbers of farmers uptake with the uptake of the technology. Next slide. And this is just a quadrant that we developed for the changes in the input costs on the x-axis and the MIRRs. So as you can see, there's a pretty even number of high rate return on investments, even with a negative change in input costs, or reducing their input costs, but also with an increase in input costs. And this is because this increase in input costs also came with substantial increases in income or crop yield. Next slide. And this is to show the sort of relationship between the change in income and the MIRR. So the higher percentage change in income of farmers, the generally higher MIRR. And this was a quadrant we developed about the financial viability of the innovator, as well as their impact, where you can see the profit margin generally has to do with an increase of their rate of impact. So there's a positive relationship between the financial viability of the innovation as well as their social impact. Next slide. Yeah, so the SWFF portfolio, as I said, a return an average of 41% on the investment. It added more than, over the course of the 9 years in the social rate of return, more than $1 billion over in 10 nations based on a $35 million investment. And the graph on the right is to show the profitability is also highly correlated with the return on investment as well. With the higher the profitability, the higher the MIRR. Next slide. So the highlights and key findings also include that the average difference in the total input costs from the portfolio, SWFF portfolio, was $189, or a 14% increase. The range in total input costs was a negative $870 to over 154% increase in Project Alba, so a large range and overall increase. And the average amount of increase in income was $1,833 a year, or alternatively, really a doubling of income. And the range in income was also very wide, between $3 and $5,000, over $5,000 a year. The range in the increase in income, and between 0% or no change in income to over a quadrupling of income. Next slide. So in our conclusion, the social rate of returns are a very important document in measuring the project performance and the efficiency of funding. Our portfolio included 18 of these with widely varying results. The overall, the SWFF portfolio average of 15 innovators of 38%, the subset of 15 graduate innovators of 38% average exceeds the acceptable ranges of 10 to 20%, as I mentioned before. And the reasoning behind this is primarily an increase in income and a high number of adoptees of the technology. Next slide. Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, sir. And so I'll come back to you in a few minutes with a few questions and see if we get anything from the audience. And so now I'd like to transition us to our innovator panel, where they can talk a little bit about what, if any, impact of having the social rates of return in this analysis has meant for their organizations. And so we'll start with Oliver from Skyfox. Oliver, over to you.
Thank you, Ku. My name, once again, is Oliver Uja. I work for Skyfox Limited, and I manage Skyfox Integrated Aquaculture and Crop Production Project, which was funded by SWFF. Well, when we started this process with Sad and his team, I guess that was in February 2019. Well, we thought it was just one of those data and theoretical exercises, typical of programs like SWFF. But because we are also a social enterprise, with the emphasis on just economic returns, gives an incomplete picture of the impact of our project. And so to have a complete picture, was useful for us, to have information about the economic returns as well as the social returns of our project. So we're actually curious to see what kinds of results this, exercise could bring or generate. And so, but, by the time the team concluded this analysis in somewhere around April, we, actually took a detailed look at the analysis and results for Skyfox, and it really showed us how effectively we have, used the SWFF and our own resources to create value for our beneficiaries and their communities. So it actually enabled us to evaluate, if you like, our social impact, especially in financial terms, and trying to also understand the cost boundaries and savings, for our farmers. So, in terms of its importance for us, it actually helped us in better planning and also kind of internally evaluating our project implementation, and also specifically, trying to understand the impact, the specific impact that we're having on our beneficiaries. Some of those, for instance, are in terms of increased yield per hectare, which actually increased like from 24% from about a metric ton per hectare to about 1.24 metric tons, and that's for like onions. And then also the average yield, of our farmers actually also increased to about 104 kg per hectare per farmer. And also, in terms of inputs, use of organic fertilizers actually declined. Well, we don't have all the time. Maybe I would have given a little background about the project itself, but it's it's a project that actually combines fish production, and that's and crop production. So the wastewater from the fish is discharged into crop farms, and that also actually substitutes the use of organic fertilizers for the farmers. And so we actually witnessed a huge decline of about almost 80% of use of organic fertilizers due to the wastewater, fish wastewater, which are channeled towards the crop farms. Also, most of them also rely, or these farmers rely on gas to actually pump water from the stream, from lakes, onto their farms. But with our infrastructure, which also use solar irrigation facilities, these farmers were able to cut down on their use and from about 1,320 liters to just about 250 liters per season. Of course, labor for crops also declined from about 30 man days to just about 15 man days. And then for fish, of course, it actually increased from 0 man hours to about 15 man hours, because ab initio, these farmers were not involved in fish production. And also, from the analysis that has been done, we also recorded MIRR of about 52% for our innovation. So that's more like the kind of effect that we actually would intervention. And with this understanding, actually, we are working now on revising business models and our share formula, to reflect these cost savings, and also try to offer services actually at true market cost for these farmers, because because this has been largely grant funded. It has actually offered most of these beneficiaries the opportunity to participate in this project. But of course, with the grant now out, there's this fear about some of these beneficiaries not being able to really participate because of the expected increased cost of providing these services. So, but with our understanding of the kind of savings we are giving to the farmers, it is now easier for us to at least be able to see how we can work within that limit to ensure that we stay able to provide sustainable services to our beneficiaries. I guess I can leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. That was really helpful, and a really good understanding of not only how this affects the farmer, but how it has affected the sustainability of your operations. So we appreciate that. We'll turn it over to Lisa now.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you in the audience. My name is Lisa Smits. I'm representing Ignitia. We do tropical weather forecasting for smallholder farmers in West Africa, and very soon also expanding into the Latin American market. So to give you a little background into this, I would like to start with thanking the SWFF team for insisting on doing these calculations. I think that before we did this study and the calculations behind it, we were a little bit skeptical of what kind of results we could get from it. We already knew that by providing weather forecast to farmers that previously did not have such information, and also allowing them to take decisions based on their current knowledge would be impactful. But one of the most common critics that we have received over the years, and this comes from investors as well as donors, is that we might reach scale with our operations and reaching a lot of farmers, but that one service is far from enough from helping farmers to increase their yields. Instead, there is a common belief that a service that instead would be a platform towards different kinds of information services, such as market information, advisory, weather forecast, but also other services such as buy and sell services would have many times bigger impact. Even if this might be true on fairly mature markets, where each step towards productivity is significant and where the changes of productivity, where the best and the worst case changes are in the range of a few percentage points, then yes, I would also agree with that it most likely would have a much bigger impact with providing a number of different services. However, looking at markets that are built out of small-scale farmers and that are growing all of their crops based on rain-fed farming, meaning that water is the only source of, rain is the only source of water that farmers can get to. Also, one service, such as a weather forecast, can actually have a big impact on scale. And I think this is exactly what this measure have showed for us, that we don't only reach over 1 million of farmers, but we are also providing every day a significant impact on the produce by the end of the season. I think that maybe the most useful for us have been to show that it is possible to use each dollar that a donor has spent in an extremely efficient way by today having a 93% scoring when it came to the SWFF project particularly. I also think that it has given us insights on how we can become even more efficient while we scale up, but also when the time is ready for it, when there is lower literacy rates, both when it comes to reading and writing, but also when it comes to technical literacy, there might be opportunities to adding on even other services. Working ahead. So I think that was our conclusions from this. We have gotten basically a tool or an argument for having these discussions with other investors that have by principle not invested in single service applications to farmers. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Really appreciate that. There was a lot of clarity and background in the challenges of convincing the skeptics of the quality of the service. So I think one thing the audience should know, and Saad talked about this a little bit, but just to give you a little bit more background to clarify, is one of the things that was really important to the SWFF donors was the quality of data. And so we hear from innovators on what was happening, and we believed them, but we followed a trust but verify principle. So we hired master's and PhD students to go out as external surveyors for us. And so basically, the SWFF innovators would give us their list of customers or end users, and then we would send our external surveyor out. They would do a cluster randomized sample of those end users, and then go out and do a survey interview, usually lasting 35 to 45 minutes with these different farmers. And so often we restricted it just to one country so we could have a clear set of comparison for the organization. And so in the case of both Skyfox and Ignitia, we sent external surveyors. And so the external surveyors were out in the field for usually 6 to 8 weeks, and usually at a minimum collected 50 cluster sample randomized interviews. And so while, these are hundreds of thousands or millions of households that these organizations are working with, and, we would, in an ideal space, we would have a sample size of about 435 households or more. We at least get some idea of the marginal benefit from the farmer's perspective, not from the program's perspective, on what's happening. And so we use the data collected from those farmers, not from the innovators, to validate what we had initially thought from the social rates of return. So basically, we took what we could get from the innovators, and then we improved it when we got external validated field data. And so, Saad, I guess a question to you is, what were some of the challenges that you faced in trying to look at all the different data sets and try to bring them together to understand what was happening with the different innovations?
It was challenging because the original template was fairly cut and paste about the increase on a production of a commodity. The innovations were arranged in a lot of things. So, for instance, like Sky Fox, they added an income by providing fish, and they added other social benefits that I had to include. There was also Meat Naturally that was a livestock innovation that I had to mold the data towards making a social rate of return, and as well as the intangible or effects of a lot of these innovations, where it was coming from like the nutrient-rich water Sky Fox uses from the fish waste or other things. So it was kind of molding that data in order to reflect all of the different services and streams that the innovators provided. That was difficult.
And so that leads into a question from the audience on which innovations had bigger socioeconomic environmental impacts beyond the financial scenarios with the higher reach. And so, Katie, if we can go back to the two tables, that would be helpful. Yep. So yeah, these tables. Thanks. And so one of the things that we saw was the environmental benefits that we hadn't expected based on the external surveys, that there was a significant, in some cases, not in all, in some cases, a significant reduction in the use of chemical fertilizers, which have negative environmental impacts, often causing algal blooms. We also saw, in some cases, more efficient usage of water, not all, and reductions in some cases of water usage where it was irrigation fed versus rain-fed agriculture, but especially in some of the rain-fed agriculture places, because in Ignatia's example, farmers knew had better timing in applying pesticides and fertilizers. They used significantly less and got greater yields. And one of the other things that isn't actually shown by this analysis is the secondary benefit of the income use. That in many cases, including for both of the two innovations we've talked to here, many of the end users talked about the income generation and how that often led to them being able to pay for school fees for their children, which then leads to another set of benefits that we didn't cover or capture in this analysis. But Saad, you want to add to that on, from your perspective, which innovations had bigger socioeconomic and environmental impacts?
I would say it would be kind of correlated with the MIR. So if in this chart you see like with Lal Tiersi, they have a very high MIR, and their big impact was a huge reduction in gasoline usage, which was and a lot of them involved the reduction of fertilizer usage by half, or replacement with much more organic or more sustainable fertilizer, and that also usually had some correlation with a high rate of return on investment.
Thanks, Todd. And so wanted to get the innovators' perspective. So, Oliver and Lisa, what from your perspective were some of the socioeconomic and environmental impacts of your innovations that maybe the audience wouldn't know?
Well, I
Okay.
can start. Oh, sorry. Please go ahead,
Please
Oliver.
go ahead, Lisa.
So let's start with
All
Lisa,
right.
and then we'll go to Oliver.
So I think that what we saw was a much more efficient use of inputs. That means from the point that, the farmer was about to plant, that there was no need for replanting, to the actual part that Ko already mentioned, which was an actual decrease of amounts of fertilizers and pesticides, and still receiving higher yields by the end of the day, because those applications were optimal when it comes to the weather, which means that the plant has a chance to ingest most, if not all of it, and very little is then washed out into the water streams. Another part that is not visible through in these numbers was that surprising fact for us was that also the labor costs were halved in this project. And this came out of a tradition of hiring labor, but then not being able to use them if it would be wet out in the field or raining that day. The reason for that is that the most common reasons for hiring labor to help you out in a field is, for example, for harvesting. And harvesting needs to be done while the crops are dry. Otherwise, the risks of getting mold and other kinds of bacterial fungus would be very high. And in these cases, the workers would be sitting under a mango tree and watching the field, but still wanted to be paid by the end of the day. And by decreasing these kinds of happenings with better weather forecasting, the farmers also saved money on using the service.
Thanks, Lisa. Oliver?
Okay. For us, I think the most important environmental benefit from our intervention actually is the multiple use of water. In other words, we actually kind of doubled and in most cases tripled output by using the same quantity of water because of the biofiltration process through which we subject the wastewater and recycle them for more production of fish, for instance, first of all, before we channel this to the crop fields for crop production. And so because of that technology, the demand, the subsequent demand for water, in this process actually is drastically reduced. Also, because of the environmental requirements also of the project, we significantly actually decreased the use of pesticides and chemicals in the production process, thereby making our production more or less organic. And so that's also an important environmental impact which the project had. Also, we because water also is being channeled to the crop fields, farmers actually were able to do multiple cropping, multiple season cropping in the year because of availability of water, especially during the dry spell of periods of the year. So, and that also meant more output for on the average for farmer per year. So these are the most significant environmental impacts which we can mention and discuss.
Thanks. Appreciate that. So I want to turn it back to Saad for a question. So if I remember correctly, SWFF wrote a paper based on this, and it's in submission for publication. And so are there any things that you think that came out of that paper that policymakers or stakeholders who are working at this nexus of innovation and agriculture could take away from the SWFF example?
I think the main takeaway would be to increase the evaluation of non-economic benefits. These MIRs also, apply to healthcare and other fields, and for the field of international development and agricultural development, they're not as widely used, and they are, I think, more of a real quantifier of an impact of social and economic impact of particularly technology, but of a lot of the other different agricultural services as it returns compared to a traditional return on investment or financial analysis.
Thanks. And so just to confirm, are there any other audience? Oh, there's one more audience question. So how are you planning to, so I guess this one's to me. How are you planning to monitor innovators and impacts and prolonged COVID shocks and risks? Do you have any plan to establish cell phone-based community M&E for quick analysis of status instantly? So I think 2 or 3 things here. The reality is the COVID-19 is having significant impacts worldwide, but they are not always the same. So in some communities, they had experienced a significant lockdown, and then the cases abated, and so they went back to normal. In other communities, they've been under, if not a continuous lockdown, under significant restrictions for now more than 6 months. So I think our plan will be dependent upon the situation on the ground in a specific country. If it's a case where we can't get out to the field, then we will look at some types of, as you say, long-term or long-distance monitoring evaluation, sometimes cell phone-based surveys to customers or end users if they're willing to participate. In other cases where COVID-19 hasn't been as significant as an impactor, we will use our traditional methods. We do expect in this new Water and Energy for Food program, we will have multiple ways to measure and monitor impact, not excluding the external surveyors. So if there's anyone listening who's a master's or PhD student who either has an agriculture or a business background, we have an external surveyor's application window open now for next March through July. So we'd highly recommend that you at least think about applying. And I think that's one of the ways we're going to get baseline level data for some of our follow-on investments in the Water and Energy for Food program. But as far as having a cell phone-based M&E system for the whole program, the answer is no. Any other questions from the audience? Oh, here we go. What steps or template of assessment let's see, what steps, template of assessment we internalize and know in our own way and deliver on shared ambition to improve in performance? So one of the things, and I think this I will take to the innovators and phrase slightly differently, is, it's one thing for a donor to say, hey, we want to see your impact, and here's some money, and we're going to monitor it, and we're going to give you this milestone-based funding. It's quite another thing if you're, a social entrepreneur, to one, need to make money, and two, want to have impact. And so what are the metrics that you all use that are most important for you, both internally and as you're trying to, as Lisa said, get direct investment? So I guess I'll go to Lisa first for that question, and then I'll go to Oliver.
Cool, thank you. I think that in our case, it's been very important to show that we can reach small-scale farmers on scale, even though the markets that we are working on, such as Nigeria, Ghana, Ivory Coast very soon, and Burkina, are highly fragmented when it comes to agricultural actors. To do that through mobile phone has turned out to be a success, and we are often the first service that is used after calling or texting. So it's like way past app world, so to say. We still talk about basic phones. So to get back to the question then, what is most important for us to measure? It has been the impact, which we measure in terms of increased yields or increased income for the population that we serve, as well as how many we can reach. Those two in combination, and then looked over across multiple years, as one season can be very different from another, and whether services can then have either a very large impact or a smaller impact, gives us data over time that shows how we can scale these operations efficiently. I think this metric as well, if it would be more widely recognized throughout different donors and investors, it would be a great way of showing how we're achieving these benefits to farmers. Lastly, I should also mention that obviously it is important that we are breaking even on the markets we are working on, because that is a sustainability measure of us being around for longer than only for projects. And I think we have reached to such comfort level now in both Ghana, in Mali, and in Burkina Faso, lastly, which then shows that the services can continue in a sustainable way, and the profits can be reinvested into a larger scale. Thank you.
Very comprehensive answer, much appreciated. Oliver, your thoughts on how you measure your own performance, what's important to Skyfox, and both in the economic terms and the social impact terms?
Yes, and I think just to continue from where Lisa stopped, I think it's important to, for us to understand that, there are so many interests here. And in this case, the interest of the beneficiaries, the interest of the company itself, and of course, the interest of the funders. And I think those are very, very fundamental and important. But in our case, we actually prioritize, if you like, the interest of the farmer, and of course, the interest of the funders. And if you look at the farmer, he or she is more interested in income. And of course, associated with that is increased productivity and output from, and also the increased opportunity for production. Like in the case of aquaculture, most, if not all, the farmers actually never had anything to do with aquaculture. But this project actually offered that opportunity, and because of even the cost involved, in going into this kind of venture, we actually evolved what we call a share formula, which actually enables or allows many people to actually own a pond of fish. In other words, it is possible for you to own a kilo of fish in a pond. So you don't really need to have all the money to invest in one pond, because most of these farmers, beneficiaries, don't have that kind of money available to them. And so it was easy for them to actually come together in groups and invest in these ventures. So that for us is very, very important at the farmer. Of course, for us also, we are also interested in ensuring that after the grant that this continues to run. And so we should be able to at least cover our cost and have some form of small margin, to keep us in business and to help us also continue to scale. So these are very, very things that we look at and that actually kind of give us an indication of whether we are creating the right impact and making progress. Thank you.
Thanks, Oliver. And so we've come to the end of our session. I wanted to thank all three of our speakers, Saad and Lisa and Oliver, for your time and sharing your thoughts and all of the impact that you've had. We really appreciate that. And Saad, on your side, appreciate talking about the process and the big picture view. The take-home message for me from what I heard today was that, it's not just about dollars and cents as a general investor might want to see. Especially in the social impact space, it's about, who you're impacting, the breadth and the depth of your impact. And we need to do a better job in development of not just saying, oh, they're trying to work with the poor, or, oh, they're trying to benefit the environment, but actually measuring and monitoring so that we know as donors where our dollars are going and what's the best use of them. And I think what we've seen is, having an experimental portfolio approach as Securing Water for Food did, we were able to see, which sorts of organizations did have a bigger impact than others and which ones should continue to receive funding versus shouldn't. And so obviously nothing is foolproof and perfect, and obviously we could improve upon both the gender aspect of the social rate of return metric as well as the environmental and biodiversity aspect. But at a minimum, we still have at least a basis of comparison now that we didn't have before. So thanks everyone for your time and have a great rest of your day and week. Bye-bye.